My name is Ruby Watson. I'm 34 years old, and I read numbers the way other people read human faces. I look for the lie. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the sterile scent of Massachusetts General Hospital was sticking to the back of my throat. I sat in the waiting room, gripping a leather portfolio, holding documents that were about to end 2 lives. Across from me sat Beatrice Thorne. She was my former mother-in-law, and she wore her signature Chanel pearls with a predatory grin. She leaned forward in her plastic chair, ensuring her voice carried across the quiet room. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. Ruby, she patted her designer handbag. Now he has a beautiful baby boy with Alyssa, a real family. She ran her eyes over my plain trench coat, letting her disdain hang in the air. For 5 years, she had treated my middle-class background like a disease her son caught by accident. Now she sat here gloating that my ex-husband had abandoned me for my former best friend. She expected tears. She expected me to shrink into myself the way I used to. I just smiled, a small, cold adjustment of my lips. Is that what you believe, Beatrice? The air in the waiting room shifted. Her smugness faltered for a fraction of a second. She opened her mouth to deliver another insult, but the automatic sliding glass doors parted with a soft hiss. A rush of cold Boston air hit my ankles. A man walked into the lobby. I did not need to turn my head to know who it was. I just watched Beatrice. In the span of a single heartbeat, every drop of color drained from her face. Her hand flew up to clutch her pearls. Before I tell you who just walked through those hospital doors and why his presence turned Beatrice into a ghost, please take a moment to subscribe. Welcome back to Olivia Stories Revenge, where the best retaliation is always hidden in plain sight. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from today. To understand why I sat smiling in a hospital lobby while my ex-husband's mother bragged about his new child, we need to rewind. Exactly 13 months ago, I woke up in our shared bed to the sound of silence. Derek was not in the kitchen making coffee. His closet was half empty. His golf clubs were missing. I walked into my home office and found his wedding ring sitting on my laptop keyboard. Next to it was a yellow sticky note with a rushed scrawl. I need a woman with passion, Ruby. You just stare at spreadsheets. I opened my laptop to check our joint accounts. The screen loaded and my stomach dropped. $140,000. My entire life savings, earned through 60-hour work weeks auditing corporate fraud, was gone. It had been wired out at 2 a.m. to an offshore LLC called Apex Holdings. 2 hours later, my phone chimed. It was an Instagram notification. My best friend Alyssa had posted a photo of her wrist resting on the center console of a car I recognized. Derek's car. She was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet. The betrayal was swift and surgical. They assumed my quiet, analytical nature meant I was weak. They thought stealing my money and my pride would break me. They forgot one detail. I am a forensic accountant. They thought I was boring. They did not realize I was compiling a database. The silence in my house that morning was a specific kind of quiet. It was the heavy, still air of a space that had been permanently altered. Usually Derek woke up before me. He would grind expensive coffee beans and leave the television blaring financial news in the living room. On this Tuesday, there was no smell of coffee. There was no sound of anchors discussing market futures. There was only the low hum of the refrigerator. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress and felt the chill of the hardwood floor against my bare feet. His side of the bed was perfectly made. It lacked the usual indentations of someone who had slept through the night. I walked down the hallway and noticed the negative space first. The antique hall table was missing his keys. The coat rack was missing his tailored camel hair overcoat. I stepped into the home office we shared and stopped. My laptop sat closed on the mahogany desk. Resting dead center on the silver aluminum casing was a gold band, his wedding ring. The metal caught the morning light filtering through the blinds. Tucked underneath the ring was a square yellow sticky note. The handwriting was rushed and jagged. It was the penmanship of a man who wanted to escape the room as fast as possible. I need a woman with passion, Ruby. You just stare at spreadsheets. I read the 2 sentences 3 times. The words did not process as an emotional wound right away. They processed as a data point, an anomaly in the pattern of our 5-year marriage. I pushed the gold ring aside. It hit the desk with a hollow clatter. I opened the laptop and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. I did not open my email or my text messages. My instinct, honed from a decade of forensic accounting, told me to follow the money. People lie with their words, but they leave a trail of truth in their ledgers. I logged into our joint banking portal. The screen refreshed. The dashboard loaded. The checking account balance read 0. I blinked and leaned closer to the screen. The savings account balance also read 0. I clicked the transaction history tab. At 2:14 in the morning, an outgoing wire transfer had been initiated. $140,000. My entire life savings. That money was not shared wealth. It was my individual contribution to our future. It represented 60-hour work weeks auditing corporate fraud. It represented canceled vacations, late nights eating cold takeout over tax codes, and years of careful, quiet saving. The destination account was listed as an offshore limited liability company called Apex Holdings. The routing number traced back to a bank in the Cayman Islands. He had timed the transfer perfectly, bypassing the daily alert limits by authorizing the wire through his corporate business account, which was linked to our joint profile. He had not just packed a bag and left. He had executed a premeditated financial heist. I sat back in my desk chair. The air in the room felt thin. My phone on the edge of the desk vibrated with an Instagram notification. I reached for it with stiff fingers. The notification was from my best friend, Alyssa. She was an art consultant who always wore designer brands on a gallery assistant salary. We had known each other since college. She was the one who helped me pick out my wedding dress. I tapped the screen. Alyssa had posted a photo on her story. It was a close-up of her wrist resting on the leather center console of a vehicle. The interior stitching of the leather was distinct. It was the custom red stitching of Derek's imported sports car. Wrapped around Alyssa's wrist was a new diamond tennis bracelet. The stones caught the sunlight in a blinding glare. The caption read, "Next chapter." The physical reality of the betrayal hit me then, a sharp, cold pain in the center of my chest. My husband and my best friend had not just fallen in love behind my back. They had coordinated an exit strategy funded entirely by my labor. They assumed my quiet, analytical nature meant I was passive. They equated my silence with weakness. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text message. The sender name was Beatrice Thorne. My mother-in-law rarely texted me unless it was to complain about a holiday arrangement or critique my choice of footwear. I opened the message. "A man like Derek needs a peer, not a liability. I trust you will handle this transition with dignity, Ruby. Do not make a scene." I stared at the glowing letters. The word liability echoed in my mind. It acted as a key turning a lock in my memory. The walls of my home office faded, and I was suddenly standing in the bridal suite of a country club 5 years ago. It was my wedding day. The room smelled of crushed white lilies and expensive hairspray. My mother, a retired public school teacher, was kneeling on the carpet trying to fix a tear in the tulle of my gown. Her hands were shaking because she was nervous around Derek's wealthy family. Beatrice had walked into the room wearing a custom silver suit. She did not offer congratulations. She looked down at my mother with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. Beatrice turned to her sister and whispered a sentence that burned into my brain forever. "Derek is an eagle marrying a pigeon. A girl like this is a liability to our family name." They thought I did not hear it. I heard every syllable. For 5 years, I swallowed that insult. I attended their galas. I bought their lavish birthday gifts. I played the role of the quiet, grateful wife who had married above her station. Beatrice built her entire identity on the illusion of elite superiority. She viewed human beings as assets or liabilities based on their bank accounts and bloodlines. To her, I was just a boring accountant who dragged down her son's glamorous image. I brought my focus back to the present, back to the empty house and the zero balance on my screen. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw the yellow sticky note at the wall. Grief in my profession is a luxury you cannot afford until the audit is complete. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the corner of the office. I pulled out a heavy-bound encyclopedia of tax law. Behind the book, hidden in the shadow of the shelf, was a small, black, rectangular box. It was a military-grade encrypted hard drive. Derek used to mock me for my meticulous digital filing habits. He called it a boring obsession. He laughed when I scanned our grocery receipts, our utility bills, and his business expense reports. He thought I was just being a rigid, paranoid accountant. He had no idea what I was actually doing. I was not just filing papers. Over our 5-year marriage, I had compiled a master database. I had digitized every single Thorne family document that crossed my desk. I had copies of Beatrice's estate deeds. I had Derek's commercial real estate tax returns. I had the formation documents for his boutique firm. I plugged the hard drive into my laptop and entered the 32-character decryption key. A folder labeled Thorne Master File appeared on my desktop. They thought stealing my money and my pride would leave me defenseless. They did not understand that to a forensic accountant, data is the only weapon that matters. I opened the transaction log for the offshore transfer one more time. I stared at the name Apex Holdings. A discrepancy gnawed at the edges of my mind. The math did not add up. $140,000 is a significant amount of money, but it is not enough to fund the billionaire lifestyle Alyssa expected and Derek pretended to live. Why set up a complex Cayman Islands shell company just to steal a middle-class savings account? Why funnel the money offshore instead of just withdrawing a cashier's check? The numbers were whispering a different story. The theft was not just an exit strategy, it was a cover-up. My husband was hiding something far bigger than an affair. The question was not just how they betrayed me. The real question was, where did my life savings actually go? I needed them to drop their guard so I could find out. I needed them to think they had won. I filed the divorce papers 3 days after finding the empty house. I did not walk into the courthouse like a brilliant forensic auditor ready to dismantle her opponent. I walked into the downtown mediation office, playing the role of a hysterical, devastated wife. I wore a wrinkled gray cardigan and kept my hair pulled back in a messy knot. I hired a cheap strip mall attorney named Greg, who specialized in rapid, uncontested separations. He carried a scuffed briefcase and smelled faintly of stale diner coffee. My strategy was a calculated smokescreen. If you want to catch a predator, you have to convince them they have already eaten you. The mediation room was a sterile glass box overlooking the harbor. Derek sat across the polished oak table wearing a bespoke navy suit. He checked his heavy silver watch twice before I even sat down. Beatrice occupied a chair in the corner, acting as his moral support, though her posture resembled a queen overseeing an execution. She wore a tailored cream blouse and radiated pure disdain. I kept my gaze fixed on my cuticles. I let my shoulders slump forward. I dabbed my eyes with a crumpled tissue every time the mediator spoke. When the topic of the missing funds arose, I stammered. I told the mediator I just wanted peace. I requested a meager $1,500 a month in spousal support and relinquished my claim to the marital home. Derek let out a sharp bark of a laugh. It was the sound of pure, arrogant relief. He looked at Beatrice, and they shared a knowing, triumphant glance. They assumed I lacked the mental fortitude to fight for my stolen savings. They thought my tears were real. Derek signed the settlement agreement with a flourish of his expensive fountain pen. He practically threw the paperwork across the table. He felt victorious. He had no idea he was just signing a receipt for his own destruction. Back in my cramped Cambridge rental apartment, the performance ended. I traded the wrinkled cardigan for comfortable clothes and brewed a pot of dark roast coffee. My new living room did not have a television or a sofa. It had a 6-foot corkboard, a color laser printer, and 3 high-definition monitors. I spent my days working my corporate job tracking financial anomalies for institutional clients. At night, I spent another 40 hours a week running deep web audits on my fake marriage. I was operating on 4 hours of sleep and pure analytical adrenaline. I loaded the encrypted backups from my hidden hard drive. My target was Thorn Ventures. Derek had inherited the boutique commercial real estate firm from his late father. He paraded around Boston with the title of Chief Executive Officer. He spent his afternoons taking prospective clients to expensive steak lunches and playing golf at exclusive country clubs. He projected the image of a titan. My spreadsheets painted a different reality. I traced the inbound revenue streams and cross-referenced them against his operating expenses. The ledgers revealed a rotting core. Derek was bleeding cash at an alarming rate. The numbers showed he was skipping crucial vendor payments and delaying commercial lease renewals. I needed to understand why the deficit was growing so fast. I pulled the personal credit card statements I had digitized months prior. The narrative became clear. He was trying to fund a lavish lifestyle he could not afford to impress a woman who demanded luxury. Alyssa was a gallery assistant who catered to old wealth. She spent her days surrounded by people who owned private islands and imported sports cars. She expected that level of status. She wanted weekend getaways in Aspen and spontaneous trips to Paris. Derek wanted to be the man who provided it. When his legitimate income fell short, he made a fatal error. I found the illegal transfers hidden deep within the company accounting software. Derek was siphoning money from his own client escrow accounts to pay for Alyssa's designer wardrobes and 5-star hotel suites. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. Commingling client funds is a fast track to losing a real estate license and facing federal prison time. He was walking on a razor-thin wire over a deep canyon. But the escrow theft did not explain my missing money. $140,000 is a very specific number. It was wired to the offshore shell company called Apex Holdings. Derek thought the Cayman Islands routing number would act as an impenetrable wall. Money launderers rely on volume and speed to hide their tracks. They assume no one will have the patience to trace every single digital bounce across the global banking network. I had nothing but patience. I spent 3 weeks writing custom data scraping scripts. I peeled back the corporate registration layers of Apex Holdings. I tracked the IP addresses used to access the account and matched the transaction dates against global currency fluctuations. The ledger showed my life savings sitting in the offshore account for exactly 48 hours. Then the entire amount was routed back into the United States. It landed in a business checking account registered in Delaware. I pulled the corporate filings for the receiving entity. The company was called Blackwood Consulting. I cross-referenced the business license, expecting to find a luxury car dealership or a high-end jeweler. I expected to find the source of Alyssa's new diamond tennis bracelet. I found something entirely different. I ran the managing director's name through state licensing databases. The owner of Blackwood Consulting was a man named Vance. I pulled his professional credentials. He did not sell luxury goods. He held an active private investigator license. The address listed on his corporate filings led to a secure office park on the outskirts of the city. Further digging revealed his firm specialized in corporate espionage and discreet personal matters for high-net-worth individuals. I sat in the glow of my monitors listening to the rain hit my apartment window. The red string on my corkboard was shifting into a new configuration. Derek stole my money because Alyssa convinced him to fund a mysterious investment. He thought he was buying her loyalty and securing their new life together. But the banking trail proved Alyssa had immediately forwarded my entire life savings to a high-level private spy. A gallery assistant with a taste for expensive jewelry had just paid a 6-figure sum to a professional fixer. The math was screaming a new narrative. The betrayal was not a simple office romance. It was a cover-up. What secret was my former best friend trying to bury, And who exactly was she paying to bury it? I needed to unmask the private investigator. Independent fixers rarely operate without a primary benefactor pulling the strings from the shadows. I leaned closer to my monitors, letting the pale blue light wash over my tired eyes. The digital clock in the corner of my screen read 3 a.m. The city outside my window was completely still, but my mind raced through databases. I typed the investigator's name into federal court dockets, looking for past cases where he provided expert testimony or surveillance evidence. A distinct financial pattern emerged from the archived records. Over the past decade, this particular investigator appeared as a defense witness in a dozen high-profile corporate disputes. The legal retainers for his courtroom appearances were always routed through the same umbrella corporation. The holding company was Croft Capital Partners. The chief executive officer of that firm was Julian Croft. Julian was 58 years old and controlled a vast percentage of the venture capital flowing through the Boston technology sector. He was a financial titan who operated with precision, destroying rival startups and buying out vulnerable competitors before they could pose a threat. He was also a married man. His spouse was a formidable socialite whose family name was carved into the marble facades of municipal libraries and university halls across New England. She held a controlling voting interest in his investment firm. If Julian ever faced a public scandal, especially a sordid infidelity issue involving an out-of-wedlock pregnancy, a strict prenuptial clause would strip him of his board seat. He stood to lose an entire financial empire if he stepped out of line. I pivoted my search parameters to connect the billionaire to my former best friend. I accessed the public tax filings of the contemporary art gallery where Alyssa worked. I cross-referenced the anonymous donor lists against high-ticket purchasers. Julian Croft was their most frequent benefactor. He regularly purchased abstract paintings at highly inflated prices, ensuring the gallery met its quarterly revenue quotas. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, pulling flight manifests from regional private airports. I aligned the dates Julian traveled to art conventions in Miami and New York with Alyssa's social media geotags. They were in the exact same cities, staying at the same luxury beachfront resorts on identical weekends. Alyssa was not just a gallery assistant curating exhibitions. She was the hidden mistress of a billionaire. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a picture of staggering deception. The private investigator had not been hired to protect his wealthy boss. He had somehow obtained compromising photographs of Julian and Alyssa together. Perhaps he stumbled upon the evidence during a routine corporate security sweep, or perhaps he realized the lucrative value of a secret that could topple a venture capital empire. He bypassed Julian entirely and went straight to the weak link. He demanded a silent, immediate payoff from Alyssa. My former friend was backed into a dangerous corner. She needed a 6-figure sum of untraceable cash fast to buy the investigator's silence and protect her wealthy lover. She could not ask Julian for the funds without admitting a catastrophic security breach that might end their lucrative arrangement. She needed a target, someone naive, eager to impress, and desperate to feel important. She found my husband. Derek was the perfect mark for a desperate grifter. He craved the adjacency to elite wealth that Alyssa represented. He wanted to feel like a savior, rescuing a beautiful, sophisticated woman from a temporary financial bind. Alyssa undoubtedly spun him a tragic story about a unique investment opportunity gone wrong, or a sudden cash flow crisis threatening her career. She weaponized his inherent arrogance against him. Derek was so desperate to play the hero that he initiated the late-night wire transfer, draining my hard-earned savings. He burned his loyal marriage to the ground, believing he was securing a glamorous future with a superior partner. He had no idea he was merely funding hush money to another man's spy. The layers of betrayal were suffocating. Derek ruined our life together for a woman who treated him like a disposable pawn. He was nothing but a social and financial meat shield, standing between a billionaire's mistress and a blackmailer. The situation grew even more complex when Alyssa realized she was pregnant. An illegitimate child would shatter the fragile truce she maintained with her powerful benefactor. She needed a permanent cover story to explain the growing baby bump and hide the illicit affair from the formidable wife pulling the strings at Croft Capital. Derek provided the ideal alibi. He was proud, boastful, and entirely blind to reality. He paraded Alyssa around downtown Boston, presenting himself as the virile, expectant father. He drained his own company escrow accounts to keep her satisfied and maintain the illusion of endless prosperity. He was stealing from loyal clients to buy designer maternity wear for a woman who was actively deceiving him. Alyssa slept next to him every night, counting down the days until her actual benefactor could safely claim his heir. I sat back in my desk chair listening to the quiet hum of my computer tower. I watched the great Thorne family legacy unravel in neat rows of Excel data. Beatrice constantly sneered at my middle-class background, but her own lineage was currently a fabricated mirage built on stolen cash and extortion. She bragged to her country club friends about the impending birth of her grandson, unaware the child shared zero genetic material with her precious son. Uncovering the truth delivered a cold, sharp satisfaction, but data alone would not deliver justice. If I handed the spreadsheets to the authorities today, Derek would face quiet embezzlement charges. He would hire expensive defense lawyers, slink away, and play the victim card to anyone who would listen. I needed them to corner themselves publicly. I needed the illusion to swell until it burst under its own immense pressure. I just had to wait for the child to be born. The biological truth was an undeniable ticking clock. Every passing week brought the Thorne family closer to their own self-made destruction. I closed the offshore banking ledgers and locked the encrypted drive. I stared out the window at the empty street below my apartment. The air was cool and still, mirroring the patience settling into my bones. Derek believed he had escaped a boring life with an uninspired accountant. He did not realize I was the only person keeping his fragile reality suspended above the ground. Now I was simply waiting to cut the cord. But how long would it take before the ruthless billionaire decided to step out of the shadows and come collect what rightfully belonged to him? Autumn turned to a bitter New England winter. My apartment radiator hissed against the biting chill, but my computer screens remained hot with a continuous flow of data. Beatrice Thorne treated her social media profiles like a royal gazette. I monitored her public posts using a secure proxy account. Every week featured a new, elaborate update on the impending arrival of the Thorne heir. She posted high-resolution photographs from exclusive country club luncheons, showcasing Alyssa draped in pastel silk maternity dresses. The captions were predictable studies in elitist arrogance. She typed long paragraphs praising her son's virility and the impeccable pedigree of their growing family. Beatrice hosted a winter baby shower that looked more like a corporate gala. She rented the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel. The event featured towering ice sculptures, intricate floral centerpieces, and a live string quartet playing classical arrangements. She tagged Derek in dozens of pictures. He stood behind Alyssa, resting his hands on her swelling stomach, projecting the cultivated image of a proud, conquering patriarch. They smiled for the cameras, holding crystal flutes filled with expensive, sparkling cider. They looked like a dynasty on the rise. The dramatic irony tasted sharp and cold in the back of my throat. I watched them perform their societal theater, knowing the foundation beneath their feet was built on vapor. I did not just suspect the grand deception, I possessed concrete biological proof. During one of my late-night deep web sweeps, I found a vulnerability in the patient scheduling portal of the private fertility clinic Alyssa frequented. The security infrastructure was outdated. I slipped past the basic firewall using a simple routing bypass script. I did not need to read her intimate medical charts or violate privacy laws regarding her specific care. I only needed a single line of standard demographic intake data. Blood types are routine information required for any obstetrics file. The clinic database registered Alyssa Harding as A positive. My previous audits into the background of Julian Croft, the billionaire venture capitalist she was secretly meeting, revealed his medical profile through a publicized charity blood drive. Julian was O negative. My former husband, Derek Thorne, was AB positive. A basic understanding of genetic inheritance paints an undeniable picture. A man carrying an AB blood type cannot father a child with an O blood type. It is a biological impossibility. The strands of DNA do not bend to accommodate a wealthy family's preferred narrative. The child growing inside Alyssa could not belong to Derek. Yet Beatrice continued to parade my former best friend through Boston high society, bragging loudly about the undeniable superiority of the Thorne bloodline. She was crowning a prince who carried 0 drops of her precious regal blood. It was a magnificent illusion built on cubic zirconia and stolen funds. While the women focused on maintaining the societal illusion, Derek was quietly drowning in his own hubris. My ongoing audit of Thorne Ventures painted a grim portrait of a man suffocating under the weight of his own lies. He was attempting to sustain a billionaire lifestyle on a failing boutique real estate budget. The corporate ledgers were bleeding red ink across every column. He missed his first commercial office lease payment in November. By January, he received a formal notice of default from the Downtown Property Management Group. He ignored the certified letter, leaving it unopened on his desk. He was too busy purchasing imported Italian nursery furniture and putting non-refundable deposits down on elite private preschools to address the structural collapse of his firm. His brokerage accounts triggered multiple margin calls. The banks demanded immediate liquidity to cover his over-leveraged market positions. Derek responded by liquidating his remaining legitimate assets and siphoning even more cash from his dwindling client escrow reserves. He was a desperate man, pretending to be a king, for a queen who belonged to an entirely different empire. Every morning, he put on his bespoke wool suits, tied his silk neckties, and walked into the financial district playing the role of a titan. Every night, he returned to a house built on financial quicksand. He thought he had upgraded his life by discarding a boring accountant. He failed to see he had just volunteered to be the fall guy in a high-stakes game of corporate infidelity. The facade required constant cash injections to survive. Alyssa demanded continuous luxury to keep up the charade. If Derek stopped paying for the 5-star dinners, the designer clothes, and the elite social club dues, she might seek financial support directly from Julian. That would risk exposing her affair to the billionaire's formidable wife. So Derek kept spending money he did not have, digging his grave deeper with every swiped credit card and forged escrow check. I tracked the inevitable descent, knowing a crash was imminent. The math dictates that unsustainable systems always correct themselves, usually through catastrophic failure. I needed a catalyst. A localized explosion would only ruin Derek quietly behind closed doors. He would declare bankruptcy and play the victim. I needed an event significant enough to pull me directly into the blast zone, so I could detonate the truth in front of all of them simultaneously. I wanted the illusion to shatter publicly, where the elite society Beatrice worshipped could watch the pieces fall. The trigger arrived on a rainy Tuesday in early March. The Boston sky was a bruised purple, dumping sheets of freezing rain against my home office window. I sat at my desk reviewing a corporate client's quarterly tax flow when my cell phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed a local exchange. I did not recognize the number, but I answered with my standard professional greeting. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman with a brisk administrative tone. She identified herself as a senior account manager for the billing department at Massachusetts General Hospital. She asked to verify my identity, reading my full legal name and the last 4 digits of my Social Security number. I confirmed the details, while a cold knot formed in my stomach. She informed me that Alyssa Harding had been admitted through the emergency room earlier that morning. She was experiencing severe premature labor complications. The medical team had transferred her directly to the high-risk neonatal intensive care unit. The situation was critical and moving rapidly. I sat frozen, listening to the steady drum of rain against the glass. I kept my voice perfectly level. I asked the billing manager why the hospital was contacting me regarding the medical emergency of my former husband's pregnant girlfriend. The woman cleared her throat. The sound echoed through the phone line. She explained that the neonatal intensive care ward requires an established emergency financial guarantor for uninsured or out-of-network catastrophic events. The estimated baseline cost for the specialized incubator care required for a premature infant of this severity was staggering. The hospital administration needed to verify the primary backing account before initiating the next phase of emergency protocols. My pristine, unblemished name was listed as the sole financial guarantor on the admission forms. I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer monitor. Derek had exhausted his credit. His bank accounts were empty. His company was a hollow shell. In his desperate panic to secure elite care for a child that was not even his, he had done the unthinkable. He had reached back into the life of the woman he discarded and attempted to anchor his sinking ship to my perfect credit score. He was trying to force me to pay for the consequences of his betrayal. I asked the billing manager for the exact figure attached to the financial liability contract. I needed to know the price of his desperation. She read the number without hesitation. $500,000. The silence in my house that morning was a specific kind of quiet. It was the heavy, still air of a space that had been permanently altered. Usually, Derek woke up before me. He would grind expensive coffee beans and leave the television blaring financial news in the living room. On this Tuesday, there was no smell of coffee. There was no sound of anchors discussing market futures. There was only the low hum of the refrigerator. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress and felt the chill of the hardwood floor against my bare feet. His side of the bed was perfectly made. It lacked the usual indentations of someone who had slept through the night. I walked down the hallway and noticed the negative space first. The antique hall table was missing his keys. The coat rack was missing his tailored camel hair overcoat. I stepped into the home office we shared and stopped. My laptop sat closed on the mahogany desk. Resting dead center on the silver aluminum casing was a gold band, his wedding ring. The metal caught the morning light filtering through the blinds. Tucked underneath the ring was a square yellow sticky note. The handwriting was rushed and jagged. It was the penmanship of a man who wanted to escape the room as fast as possible. I need a woman with passion, Ruby. You just stare at spreadsheets. I read the 2 sentences 3 times. The words did not process as an emotional wound right away. They processed as a data point, an anomaly in the pattern of our 5-year marriage. I pushed the gold ring aside. It hit the desk with a hollow clatter. I opened the laptop and pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. I did not open my email or my text messages. My instinct, honed from a decade of forensic accounting, told me to follow the money. People lie with their words, but they leave a trail of truth in their ledgers. I logged into our joint banking portal. The screen refreshed. The dashboard loaded. The checking account balance read 0. I blinked and leaned closer to the screen. The savings account balance also read 0. I clicked the transaction history tab. At 2:14 in the morning, an outgoing wire transfer had been initiated. $140,000. My entire life savings. That money was not shared wealth. It was my individual contribution to our future. It represented 60-hour work weeks auditing corporate fraud. It represented canceled vacations, late nights eating cold takeout, over tax codes and years of careful, quiet saving. The destination account was listed as an offshore limited liability company called Apex Holdings. The routing number traced back to a bank in the Cayman Islands. He had timed the transfer perfectly, bypassing the daily alert limits by authorizing the wire through his corporate business account, which was linked to our joint profile. He had not just packed a bag and left. He had executed a premeditated financial heist. I sat back in my desk chair. The air in the room felt thin. My phone on the edge of the desk vibrated with an Instagram notification. I reached for it with stiff fingers. The notification was from my best friend, Alyssa. She was an art consultant who always wore designer brands on a gallery assistant's salary. We had known each other since college. She was the one who helped me pick out my wedding dress. I tapped the screen. Alyssa had posted a photo on her story. It was a close-up of her wrist resting on the leather center console of a vehicle. The interior stitching of the leather was distinct. It was the custom red stitching of Derek's imported sports car. Wrapped around Alyssa's wrist was a new diamond tennis bracelet. The stones caught the sunlight in a blinding glare. The caption read, "Next Chapter." The physical reality of the betrayal hit me then, a sharp, cold pain in the center of my chest. My husband and my best friend had not just fallen in love behind my back. They had coordinated an exit strategy funded entirely by my labor. They assumed my quiet, analytical nature meant I was passive. They equated my silence with weakness. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a text message. The sender name was Beatrice Thorne. My mother-in-law rarely texted me unless it was to complain about a holiday arrangement or critique my choice of footwear. I opened the message. "A man like Derek needs a peer, not a liability. I trust you will handle this transition with dignity, Ruby. Do not make a scene." I stared at the glowing letters. The word liability echoed in my mind. It acted as a key turning a lock in my memory. The walls of my home office faded, and I was suddenly standing in the bridal suite of a country club 5 years ago. It was my wedding day. The room smelled of crushed white lilies and expensive hairspray. My mother, a retired public school teacher, was kneeling on the carpet, trying to fix a tear in the tulle of my gown. Her hands were shaking because she was nervous around Derek's wealthy family. Beatrice had walked into the room wearing a custom silver suit. She did not offer congratulations. She looked down at my mother with a gaze so cold it could freeze water. Beatrice turned to her sister and whispered a sentence that burned into my brain forever. "Derek is an eagle marrying a pigeon. A girl like this is a liability to our family name." They thought I did not hear it. I heard every syllable. For 5 years I swallowed that insult. I attended their galas. I bought their lavish birthday gifts. I played the role of the quiet, grateful wife who had married above her station. Beatrice built her entire identity on the illusion of elite superiority. She viewed human beings as assets or liabilities based on their bank accounts and bloodlines. To her, I was just a boring accountant who dragged down her son's glamorous image. I brought my focus back to the present, back to the empty house and the zero balance on my screen. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw the yellow sticky note at the wall. Grief in my profession is a luxury you cannot afford until the audit is complete. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the corner of the office. I pulled out a heavy-bound encyclopedia of tax law. Behind the book, hidden in the shadow of the shelf, was a small, black, rectangular box. It was a military-grade encrypted hard drive. Derek used to mock me for my meticulous digital filing habits. He called it a boring obsession. He laughed when I scanned our grocery receipts, our utility bills, and his business expense reports. He thought I was just being a rigid, paranoid accountant. He had no idea what I was actually doing. I was not just filing papers. Over our 5-year marriage, I had compiled a master database. I had digitized every single Thorne family document that crossed my desk. I had copies of Beatrice's estate deeds. I had Derek's commercial real estate tax returns. I had the formation documents for his boutique firm. I plugged the hard drive into my laptop and entered the 32-character decryption key. A folder labeled Thorne Master File appeared on my desktop. They thought stealing my money and my pride would leave me defenseless. They did not understand that to a forensic accountant, data is the only weapon that matters. I opened the transaction log for the offshore transfer one more time. I stared at the name Apex Holdings. A discrepancy gnawed at the edges of my mind. The math did not add up. $140,000 is a significant amount of money, but it is not enough to fund the billionaire lifestyle Alyssa expected and Derek pretended to live. Why set up a complex Cayman Islands shell company just to steal a middle-class savings account? Why funnel the money offshore instead of just withdrawing a cashier's check? The numbers were whispering a different story. The theft was not just an exit strategy. It was a cover-up. My husband was hiding something far bigger than an affair. The question was not just how they betrayed me, The real question was, where did my life savings actually go? I needed them to drop their guard so I could find out. I needed them to think they had won. The billing director's voice hung in the quiet space of my home office. $500,000. The number was not an abstract concept to me. It was $500,000 of liability tied directly to my Social Security number. I asked the woman on the other end of the line to explain the authorization process. She tapped her keyboard and the rhythmic clacking echoed through the receiver. She stated that an electronic financial guarantor form had been completed at 6:14 that morning. It utilized a secure digital signature platform. The Internet Protocol address logged for the signature matched the mobile device of the patient's primary emergency contact, Derek Thorne. He had forged my name. When Alyssa went into premature labor, the facade Derek built began to crack under the pressure of real-world medical logistics. The high-risk neonatal intensive care unit at Mass General does not operate on country club prestige or tailored suits. They operate on verified insurance and liquid assets. The admissions desk would have run a preliminary background check on Derek. They would have seen his maxed-out credit cards, his failing corporate accounts, and the immense secondary mortgage he secretly took out on his mother's estate. He was a financial ghost. They demanded a solvent guarantor to admit Alyssa to the specialized ward. Faced with the terrifying prospect of Alyssa discovering he was broke, Derek did what he always did. He used me. He accessed his password manager, retrieved my personal identification data, and bound my spotless financial record to his newest disaster. It was the ultimate manifestation of his entitlement. He abandoned our marriage, drained my life savings, and discarded me for my best friend. Now he was attempting to shackle me with a mountain of fraudulent debt to care for a child he falsely believed was his own. The psychological mechanics of his decision were transparent. He assumed my silence over the past 13 months was a symptom of weakness. He remembered the mediation room. He remembered me wearing a wrinkled cardigan, weeping into a tissue, and accepting a meager alimony settlement without a fight. He equated my tactical retreat with total surrender. He genuinely thought I would receive the hospital bill panic and quietly arrange a payment plan just to avoid the public humiliation of a messy legal battle. He viewed me as an endless resource designed to absorb his failures. He thought I was a terrified pigeon. He forgot I was an auditor. Forging a signature on a restaurant receipt is a misdemeanor. Electronically fabricating a financial guarantor contract to defraud a major medical institution of $500,000 is a severe state felony. It carries mandatory prison time in Massachusetts. A normal person would have hung up the phone and immediately dialed emergency dispatch to report the identity theft. I did not call the police. The local authorities would just arrest Derek and put him in a holding cell. A simple arrest was too clean. It would allow Beatrice to spin a sympathetic narrative to her social circle, portraying a misunderstood son making a desperate mistake for love. I required a much more comprehensive demolition. I thanked the billing director for her diligence and requested she place a temporary administrative hold on the account while I resolved a security flag. I ended the call. I picked up my phone again and dialed my attorney. I did not call the cheap strip mall lawyer I used for the divorce smokescreen. I called the senior partner at the corporate litigation firm I kept on retainer for my own consulting business. I instructed him to draft a formal fraud alert affidavit and prepare to contact the hospital administration directly on my behalf. Then I began to pack. I unzipped a sleek black leather portfolio on my desk. The time for digital observation had expired. It was time for physical confrontation. I activated my laser printer. The machine hummed to life, sliding warm, crisp sheets of paper into the output tray. I gathered the offshore transaction logs proving Derek wired my savings to Alyssa. I collected the county registry documents revealing Derek forged Beatrice's signature to secretly leverage her historic Concord estate. I placed my iPad inside the inner pocket, ensuring its battery was fully charged to display the corporate bankruptcy ledgers of Thorne Ventures. Finally, I reached into my locked desk drawer and retrieved a very specific federal document. It was sealed in a heavy manila envelope. The exterior bore the official insignia of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was the whistleblower report I filed months ago, detailing the money laundering and escrow theft Derek committed through his commercial real estate firm. The tracking number on the flap indicated the federal investigation was no longer pending. It was active. I placed the envelope into the portfolio and zipped it shut. I put on a tailored trench coat and walked out into the freezing Boston rain. The drive to the hospital took 22 minutes. The windshield wipers swept back and forth, rhythmically pushing away the gray urban downpour. The city looked blurred and cold, but my vision had never been clearer. I navigated the slick streets with a calm, steady pulse. Derek and Alyssa believed they had lured me into a financial trap. They thought the heavy steel doors of debt were closing around me. They were wrong. I was stepping inside their glass house, and I was locking the doors behind them. I pulled into the underground parking garage of Mass General. The concrete walls echoed with the sound of tires splashing through shallow puddles. I found a space near the elevators and turned off the engine. The silence in the car was profound. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. There were no tears. There was no hesitation. I picked up the leather portfolio. The weight of the documents felt substantial in my hand. It was the weight of undeniable accountability. I rode the elevator up to the main level. The doors slid open, revealing the sprawling, bright expanse of the hospital lobby. The air hit me immediately, that sterile, nauseating scent of antiseptic and floor wax. The environment was designed to be calming, but it always felt clinical and unforgiving. I adjusted the belt of my trench coat and stepped out into the open floor. I scanned the rows of plastic waiting chairs, the coffee kiosk, and the reception desk. I was ready to face the man who stole my life. But the universe has a distinct sense of timing. The first person I encountered in that sterile lobby was not my frantic ex-husband. It was the architect of his endless arrogance. I navigated the polished linoleum floor of the main lobby, charting a direct path toward the administrative wing. My leather portfolio rested securely against my side. The hospital hummed with quiet efficiency. Nurses in blue scrubs moved past me carrying clipboards. A family huddled near the coffee kiosk, speaking in hushed, anxious tones. I kept my eyes focused on the frosted glass doors of the fraud department, located just beyond the primary waiting area. I planned to hand the attorney-drafted affidavit directly to the risk management director. I did not anticipate an interception. Ruby. The name sliced through the low murmur of the room. The voice possessed a distinct theatrical sharpness cultivated over decades of country club luncheons and charity galas. It was a tone designed to demand immediate obedience. I paused and turned. Sitting in a rigid plastic chair near the elevator bank was Beatrice Thorne. She wore a tailored charcoal wool skirt suit and held a disposable cup of sparkling water as if it were a crystal champagne flute. Her posture was impeccably straight. Even in a public medical facility, she arranged herself as though she were sitting for an oil portrait. She lowered her cup and fixed her gaze on me. The corners of her mouth twitched upward, forming a cold, triumphant smile. I took 2 steps toward her. I did not run. I did not shrink. I stood before her feeling the weight of the undeniable truth secured inside my portfolio. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. Ruby, she delivered the sentence loudly. A passing orderly glanced in our direction. Beatrice wanted an audience. She craved the spectacle of putting a middle-class outsider back in her proper place. She patted the quilted leather of her designer handbag and leaned forward. Now he has a beautiful baby boy with Alyssa, a real family. The Thorne legacy is secure. It is a shame you had to find out by stalking us in a hospital lobby, but I suppose jealousy is a difficult habit to break. She ran her eyes over my plain beige trench coat, letting her disdain hang in the sterile air. She expected me to crumble. In the early years of my marriage, a public reprimand from Beatrice would have sent me retreating to the nearest restroom to hide my hot, flushed cheeks. I used to apologize for existing in her space. I used to tailor my vocabulary to sound less analytical and more agreeable. I spent half a decade trying to earn the approval of a woman who viewed me as a genetic and financial downgrade. I did not apologize today. I just smiled. It was a small, controlled adjustment of my lips. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I rested my portfolio on my lap and crossed my legs. "Is that what you believe, Beatrice?" The air in the waiting area shifted. My calm demeanor confused her. Bullies rely on the predictable physics of intimidation. When the target fails to flinch, the predator loses their equilibrium. Her smugness faltered for a fraction of a second. She blinked and tightened her grip on the sparkling water. She attempted to regain the high ground by escalating the performance. She spoke about the child Alyssa had just delivered. She described the infant as a prince, destined to inherit a thriving real estate empire. She praised Derek for his visionary leadership and his rugged, patriarchal strength. She called Alyssa a true equal, a woman of refined taste and superior pedigree. Beatrice painted a masterpiece of a life, utilizing words like dynasty and prosperity. I sat back and listened to the tragic fiction pouring from her lips. I studied the jewelry resting against her collarbone. She wore a strand of thick, luminous pearls locked together with a platinum clasp. To the untrained eye, they projected generations of inherited wealth. They looked like family heirlooms passed down from wealthy grandmothers. My analytical mind processed the pearls differently. I saw the digital ledger. I saw the specific transaction date and the corresponding merchant code. 4 weeks ago, the primary cardholder for a high-yield retail credit account initiated a purchase at a luxury department store. The transaction tipped the account balance over its maximum limit, triggering a penalty fee. The buyer was Beatrice. The item purchased was a strand of high-grade cubic zirconia costume jewelry. The woman sitting across from me, boasting about her elite status, was wearing plastic beads bought on borrowed time. She was a financial ghost, pretending to be alive. Her historic estate was secretly leveraged to the hilt by her own son. Her prestigious country club memberships were running on 60-day grace periods. The thriving real estate empire she described was a bankrupt shell company, currently under federal investigation for money laundering. She was bragging about a kingdom made entirely of dust. She noticed my gaze resting on her necklace. She lifted her chin higher, mistaking my observation for envy. "I know it is difficult for someone of your background to comprehend our world, Ruby." She offered a look of mock pity. "You are a simple girl with simple ambitions. Derek needed a partner who understands the weight of our status. You can go home now. There is no place for you here." She opened her mouth to deliver another insult directed at my coat, but she never finished the thought. The heavy, automatic glass doors at the front entrance parted with a soft, pneumatic hiss. A rush of damp, freezing wind swept across the linoleum flooring. A man walked into the lobby. He did not shuffle or hesitate. He moved with the terrifying fluid grace of an apex predator stepping into an enclosed pen. He wore a custom-tailored dark cashmere overcoat that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. His silver hair was neatly trimmed. His shoes made a sharp, authoritative sound against the floor. A massive, suited driver trailed 2 paces behind him, projecting silent, physical menace. I did not need to turn my head to verify his identity. The shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room told me everything. It was Julian Croft, the billionaire venture capitalist, the man who owned the private investigator, the man who funded the art gallery, the actual lover of my former best friend. The true biological father of the infant Beatrice was just claiming as her regal grandson. I watched Beatrice. Her monologue died in her throat. Her eyes tracked the imposing figure striding through the lobby. She recognized him instantly. Everyone in the Boston financial and social elite recognized Julian. He was the kind of man whose mere presence at a charity dinner could dictate market trends the following morning. Beatrice instinctively sat up straighter, touching her fake pearls, preparing to offer a sycophantic greeting to a superior member of her social hierarchy. She parted her lips, arranging her face into a gracious, welcoming smile. She expected him to pause. She assumed her manufactured status granted her an audience with the billionaire. Julian did not even glance in her direction. He looked right through her, as if she were a piece of translucent furniture. His pale blue eyes were locked onto a single target, deep inside the medical facility. He carried a leather-bound medical file in his left hand. The knuckles gripping the folder were white, tight, with restrained fury. Beatrice slowly lowered her hand from her necklace. The gracious smile evaporated, replaced by a flicker of profound confusion. Why was a titan of industry striding through a maternity ward waiting room with the singular focus of a man preparing for war? I remained perfectly still in my plastic chair. The portfolio on my lap felt warm against my hands. The pieces of the board were moving into their final positions. Julian was marching directly toward the neonatal intensive care reception desk. Derek was currently trapped behind those double doors, pacing the halls under the delusion that he was the father of a newborn heir. The billionaire had arrived to claim his property. The collision was no longer a matter of months or days. It was a matter of seconds. I watched Julian disappear down the sterile white corridor, and a singular question echoed in my mind. How long would it take for my arrogant former husband to realize his entire existence was nothing but a decoy? Julian Croft did not wait in lines. He bypassed the designated waiting area entirely and approached the elevated reception counter of the neonatal intensive care unit. The administrative nurse sitting behind the glass partition looked up from her computer terminal. She possessed the hardened demeanor of a medical veteran who usually tolerated no interruptions. Julian placed his large hands flat on the counter. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to shout. His vocal cords produced a low, resonant frequency that commanded immediate compliance. I am here for the infant delivered by Alyssa Harding. The name hung in the chilled hospital air. Sitting just a few yards away, Beatrice recoiled. Her spine snapped rigid against the plastic chair. Hearing the name of her son's supposed true love, spoken by a titan of Boston finance, fractured her understanding of the room. She turned her head, her eyes wide, trying to calculate why Julian Croft was demanding access to a child she believed carried her own genetic material. I remained seated, observing the collision of two vastly different worlds. The frosted double doors leading into the restricted medical ward swung outward. Derek emerged from the secure hallway. He looked ragged. The sleeves of his expensive tailored shirt were rolled up to his elbows. The fabric was wrinkled. He carried himself with a manufactured exhaustion, attempting to project the image of a weary but triumphant patriarch who had just overseen the expansion of his bloodline. He paused, wiping a hand across his jaw. Then he noticed the imposing silver-haired man standing at the reception desk. Derek did not recognize Julian in person. He only knew the billionaire as an abstract concept, a name printed in financial journals and wealth rankings. He did not know the face of the man who owned the very oxygen Alyssa breathed. Derek adjusted his posture. He pulled his shoulders back, puffing out his chest to project dominance. He marched toward the reception desk, treating the hospital lobby like a boardroom he intended to conquer. "Is there a problem here?" Derek asked. His tone was sharp, laced with the synthetic authority he used to bully junior real estate brokers. Julian slowly turned his head. The older man did not flinch. He measured my former husband the way an appraiser evaluates a cheap counterfeit watch. He took in the wrinkled shirt, the aggressive stance, and the desperate need for validation rolling off Derek in waves. Julian found him entirely lacking. "Who are you?" Derek demanded, stepping closer. He tried to use his physical height to bridge the immense gap in true power. "I am the father. You need to step away from this desk." Julian unfastened the brass lock on his imported leather briefcase. The metallic click echoed sharply. He reached inside and produced a thick stack of legal documents bound by a black clip alongside a manila medical chart. He held the paperwork with steady, practiced hands. "You are mistaken," Julian said. His voice was clinical and devoid of any warmth. "I am the father of the boy." Derek let out a short scoff. It was a breathless sound of pure disbelief. He looked around the lobby as if waiting for a hidden camera crew to reveal a prank. He smiled a tight, nervous grimace. "You are out of your mind, old man. Alyssa is my partner. I have been with her every single day for the last year." Julian did not blink. He opened the medical folder and read the printed data aloud. He delivered the biological reality with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. "You carry an AB positive blood type, Derek. The child currently resting in the incubator is O negative. I am O negative. Genetics are not subject to negotiation." Derek stopped breathing. The air visibly left his lungs. His chest deflated and his arms fell limply to his sides. The biological math struck him. Even a man blinded by his own arrogance understood the fundamental incompatibility of those letters. Julian continued dismantling my former husband with surgical efficiency. "Alyssa works for my gallery. She has worked for me in multiple capacities for 3 years. When she discovered her condition, she required a naive, status-obsessed shield to hide the situation from my spouse. She needed a temporary distraction until the legal and financial arrangements for the child could be finalized. You were a convenient smokescreen, Derek, a placeholder. Your usefulness has expired, and I am taking my son." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The entire hospital lobby seemed to freeze in time. The nurses behind the desk stopped typing. The distant hum of the vending machines felt magnified. Derek looked hollowed out. His skin turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. The illusion he sacrificed his marriage to build vanished in a matter of seconds. He was not a conquering king. He was a disposable pawn, a foolish mark who bankrupted his own company and alienated his loyal wife just to serve as a temporary bodyguard for a billionaire's mistress. Alyssa had played him flawlessly, utilizing his desperate need to feel important against him. I shifted my gaze to Beatrice. The performative matriarch was destroyed. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth, trying to stifle a quiet gasp. Her fake cubic zirconia pearls clicked together, forming a sad, pathetic rhythm. The pristine Thorne bloodline she had weaponized against my middle-class upbringing was nothing more than a billionaire's dirty secret. The heir she bragged about to her country club friends belonged to another dynasty. The profound humiliation washed over her, causing her rigid posture to collapse. She shrank down into the plastic chair, looking old and remarkably fragile. Derek stared at the legal documents in Julian's hands. His mind struggled to process the total annihilation of his reality. He sacrificed my life savings to buy jewelry for a woman who viewed him as a joke. He leveraged his mother's historic estate to buy designer baby clothes for an infant sharing none of his DNA. He was drowning in illegal debt, and the woman he did it all for was about to walk out the door with a venture capitalist. His face contorted. The hollow shock morphed into something far more dangerous. His eyes darted around the room wild and unfocused. The polished, arrogant executive died, and a cornered, feral animal took his place. A man who has lost everything suddenly realizes he has no safety net. He looked at Julian. He looked at the armed private driver standing nearby. He knew he could not fight them. Then his frantic gaze swept across the waiting area and locked onto me. I sat quietly in my trench coat, holding my leather portfolio. I was the only familiar element in a room that had just turned hostile. I was the woman he used to control, the woman he assumed would always absorb his failures and fix his ledgers. As his world shattered, his panic turned into a feral, grasping desperation. He needed a lifeline to pull himself out of the financial and social grave he dug. He needed someone to blame, or someone to sacrifice. He began to walk toward me, his breathing ragged and shallow. The question was no longer how he would react to the truth. The question was who he would try to drag down into the abyss with him. Derek propelled himself across the lobby floor. His gait lacked the polished strut he usually deployed in corporate boardrooms. He moved with the feverish, uncoordinated energy of a drowning man reaching for a piece of floating debris. His expensive leather shoes squeaked harshly against the waxed linoleum. He pointed a trembling finger back toward the neonatal reception desk, where Julian Croft stood reviewing medical forms in serene isolation. Ruby. The name tore from his throat. It sounded like a command wrapped in a plea. He closed the distance between us, bringing the sharp scent of nervous sweat and stale designer cologne into my personal space. His eyes were wide, displaying too much white around the irises. The refined executive mask had melted away, revealing the terrified opportunist underneath. "You have to help me pay the hospital." He hissed the words, leaning down over my chair, attempting to use his height to cast an intimidating shadow. "If we clear the admissions ledger, Julian cannot just take him. They already processed your signature as the primary guarantor. You have the capital. Transfer the funds right now so we can stop this." I sat very still, studying the contours of his frantic expression. The profound depth of his entitlement was an astonishing phenomenon to witness. He had orchestrated the theft of my life savings, abandoned our marriage via a coward's handwritten note, and publicly humiliated me for over a year. Yet standing in the epicenter of his own catastrophic failure, his immediate instinct was to demand I open my wallet to purchase a child containing 0 traces of his DNA. He viewed me not as an autonomous human being, but as an appliance, a financial utility designed to dispense currency whenever his reckless ego required a bailout. He assumed his physical proximity would cow me into submission. He remembered a version of his wife who kept her head down during arguments and quietly balanced the household budget when he overspent. He relied on the old habits of our fractured dynamic. I did not shrink into the plastic chair. I stood up. The motion was smooth and deliberate, eliminating the vertical advantage he sought to establish. I unzipped the sleek leather portfolio resting in my hands. The brass teeth of the zipper parted with a sharp metallic hiss. I reached inside and retrieved my tablet. "You mean the electronic signature you forged from your personal mobile device?" I projected my voice, allowing the acoustics of the expansive medical lobby to carry the syllables. I angled my chin slightly upward, ensuring the black dome of the ceiling-mounted security camera recorded the exact phrasing of my question. I wanted the audio captured with pristine clarity for the impending police report. Derek flinched. The color draining from his face left his skin resembling old parchment. His jaw worked silently for a moment before his defensive reflexes engaged. "Prove it," he sneered, crossing his arms in a weak imitation of defiance. "You cannot prove anything. It is a digital signature." I tapped the glass screen of my tablet, waking the device from its sleep mode. The bright interface illuminated the space between us. "I do not need to prove the digital forensics right now, Derek," I replied, my tone dipping into the clinical cadence of a senior auditor presenting a terminal report. "The hospital risk management team possesses the network logs matching the unique protocol address of your phone. Right now, I just need to prove that Thorn Ventures is insolvent." I pivoted my stance, turning the glowing screen away from my former husband and presenting it directly to the woman sitting frozen in the adjacent chair. Beatrice stared at the device. Her pale, manicured hands gripped the edges of her seat. "Look at the screen, Beatrice," I instructed, maintaining a calm, rhythmic, vocal pace. "Look at the empire your son built." I opened the master financial spreadsheet I had compiled over the past 13 months. The columns were formatted to display negative balances in bright, stark red. The document was a visual bloodbath. It detailed endless lists of defaulted vendor invoices, missed commercial lease payments, and maxed-out revolving credit lines. "Your son's boutique brokerage is bankrupt." I narrated, guiding her eyes across the devastating data points. The offshore entity known as Apex Holdings was dissolved by Cayman Island regulatory authorities 3 weeks ago. The accounts are empty. The corporate shield is broken. Beatrice blinked her gaze, darting from the glowing red numbers on the tablet to the terrified face of her only child. Her breath hitched. The reality of their ruined status was piercing the thick armor of her elite delusion. I lowered the tablet, addressing the matriarch with cool precision. "He did not leave me because he needed passion, Beatrice. He He did not seek out Alyssa because she was a superior intellectual peer. He left me because he needed a vulnerable mark. He realized his legitimate business was failing, so he stole my savings to fund the illusion of wealth. He tried to play the role of a high-rolling titan to impress a woman who required constant luxury. But Alyssa is a professional grifter who caters to actual billionaires. She beat him at his own fraudulent game. She used him as a convenient shield and spent his stolen cash while waiting for her true benefactor to arrive. Derek let out a guttural sound of raw denial. The exposure of his pathetic reality in front of his mother shattered the last remaining fragments of his composure. He lunged forward, extending his hand to snatch the tablet from my grip. He wanted to smash the screen. He wanted to destroy the tangible evidence of his failure. He never made contact with the glass. A thick, muscular arm clad in a dark, tailored suit jacket intercepted Derek mid-stride. The impact produced a dull thud. The massive private security driver who had escorted Julian into the building had silently closed the distance across the lobby. He placed a broad, open palm against the center of Derek's chest and shoved. The motion required minimal exertion from the trained professional, but the force was undeniable. Derek stumbled backward, his leather shoes slipping on the polished linoleum. He crashed into a row of empty waiting chairs, sending plastic scraping loudly against the floor. He scrambled to catch his balance, his chest heaving. The security driver did not draw a weapon or assume a fighting stance. He merely stood between me and my former husband, projecting the casual, impenetrable dominance of true wealth. The driver acted as a living barrier, representing the vast, insurmountable canyon separating Derek from the elite world he so desperately tried to infiltrate. Julian Croft did not even need to look over his shoulder to neutralize the threat. His payroll handled the inconvenience. Derek was trapped. He stood panting in the aisle, boxed in by a hostile billionaire, a towering bodyguard, an alienated mother, and the ex-wife holding the blueprints of his destruction. His corporate kingdom was dead. His offshore accounts were drained. His fabricated paternity was erased. Every avenue of escape had been systematically sealed off. Yet the financial ruin of his commercial real estate firm was merely the introductory phase of the audit. The corporate bankruptcy was the first pebble tumbling down the mountainside. The true catastrophe remained hidden inside my leather portfolio. I looked at Beatrice, observing the silent tears tracking through her expensive cosmetic foundation. She was weeping for her lost social standing, mourning the death of the Thorne legacy. She had no idea the devastation had not even reached her doorstep yet. Derek had burned his own house down, but the embers had spread. What about the massive, lethal boulder currently suspended by a single thread directly above the matriarch's beloved historic estate? Beatrice Thorne stared at the glowing red numbers on my screen, but her brain refused to process the data. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful anesthetic. For her entire adult life, she had constructed a fortress of elitism around her family name. She believed the Thorne men were infallible titans of industry. A spreadsheet detailing corporate ruin did not fit into her curated worldview. She tore her gaze away from the digital ledger and looked at her only child. Derek was still leaning against the row of plastic chairs where the formidable security driver had shoved him. He was breathing through his mouth, taking shallow, erratic gulps of air. His tie hung loose. His expensive jacket was rumpled. He did not look like a conquering executive. He looked like a cornered thief. Beatrice stood up. Her legs trembled, but she willed herself to cross the short distance separating her from her son. She reached out and grabbed his forearm. Her manicured fingernails dug into the expensive wool fabric of his sleeve. "Derek, what is she talking about?" Beatrice pleaded. Her voice was thin, lacking its usual theatrical resonance. "Tell me we still have the company. Tell me this is just a temporary cash flow issue. You are the chief executive. You always fix these things." Derek could not look his mother in the eye. He turned his head, staring blankly at the polished linoleum floor, his jaw clenched tight. The profound silence radiating from him acted as a confirmation more devastating than any spoken confession. He offered no reassurances. He provided no confident excuses. The golden boy was empty. I watched the realization slowly sink into Beatrice. Her shoulders slumped. Yet even in the face of commercial bankruptcy, her fundamental arrogance survived. She released her grip on his sleeve and took a slow, shaky breath. She was already recalculating her survival strategy. "We can rebuild the brokerage," she whispered, attempting to project strength. She looked back at me, her eyes narrowing with renewed spite. "Businesses face restructuring all the time. We still possess our societal standing. We still hold the conquered property. Generational wealth is measured in land, Ruby, not just liquid capital. The Thorne estate has stood for over a century. That is our foundation." Her beloved property was a sprawling federal-style mansion situated on 3 acres of pristine Massachusetts land. It featured imported marble fireplaces, a manicured botanical garden, and a wrought-iron front gate that kept the ordinary world at a safe distance. For decades, Beatrice hosted exclusive summer charity galas on those pristine lawns. The physical address granted her instant respect and deference at her country club. She genuinely believed that as long as she held the keys to that historic sanctuary, she remained invincible. I maintained my calm, steady posture. I moved my index finger across the smooth glass of my device, executing a single, swift swipe. The red corporate bankruptcy ledger vanished. A scanned legal document materialized in its place. The header of the file featured the official embossed seal of the local county registry of deeds. I stepped forward, bringing the illuminated screen directly into her line of sight. "He lacks a company, Beatrice." I stated my vocal tones, stripping away the last remaining layers of her delusion. "Furthermore, you lack a home." Beatrice squinted at the digital PDF. The dense legal jargon blurred together, but the bold numerical figures printed near the center of the page were unmistakable. 3 months ago, Derek finalized a secondary mortgage. I read the stark details aloud, allowing the reality to echo through the sterile medical lobby. He required an immediate injection of liquid capital to cover his massive corporate margin calls and sustain Alyssa's luxury shopping habits. No reputable commercial lender would approve a loan for his failing brokerage. Therefore, he utilized the only remaining asset carrying significant equity: your home. Beatrice shook her head. A small, confused sound escaped her throat. "That is impossible," she stammered, taking a step backward. "The deed is in my name. The estate is held in a private trust. I never authorized a loan. I never signed a bank transfer." I pointed to the final page of the document displayed on my screen. "You did not sign it," I confirmed. "Derek replicated your signature. He utilized a fraudulent notary stamp to authenticate the paperwork, bypassing the standard legal verification process. He essentially stole your historic sanctuary to buy designer handbags for a woman who was actively deceiving him. He traded a century of your supposed elite heritage for a few months of fake prosperity." The color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her complexion a dull, ashen gray. She looked at the forged signature on the digital screen. The penmanship was an uncanny imitation of her own cursive script. The betrayal was total and uncompromising. Her own flesh and blood had cannibalized her only safe haven. "The commercial banking sector does not operate on country club prestige, Beatrice." I continued delivering the final clinical blow. They operate on monthly installments. Derek exhausted the loan funds weeks ago. The mandatory grace period expired. Yesterday afternoon, the financial institution filed formal foreclosure proceedings against the property. The bank owns the estate now. The eviction notice is likely taped to your mahogany front door right this very minute. Her legs gave out. The structural integrity of her entire identity collapsed in a single, agonizing instant. She sank downward, landing heavily in the adjacent plastic waiting room chair. The sudden impact caused her synthetic necklace to shift. The cheap costume pearls rattled against each other, producing a hollow, clicking sound. The generational wealth, the historic home, the elite country club status had all evaporated into dust through a single scanned PDF. "You stole my house." The sentence tore from her lungs. It was not a cultured whisper. It was a raw, guttural shriek born from pure, primal terror. She stared at Derek, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and profound disgust. Derek began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw oxygen into his lungs. He was a man trapped in a shrinking cage. To his left stood the imposing private security driver representing the hostile billionaire who had just erased his fabricated fatherhood. To his right sat his furious, weeping mother, realizing he had rendered her entirely destitute. Standing directly in front of him, holding the digital ledger of his unforgivable sins, was the ex-wife he had always considered unintelligent. He was out of moves. The arrogant swagger was gone. The polished executive facade was permanently shattered. His frantic gaze darted wildly around the lobby before locking onto me. The feral panic in his eyes morphed into a sickening display of subservient desperation. He stepped away from his weeping mother and moved toward me, raising his hands in a posture of pleading submission. "Ruby, please," he begged. The sound of my name sliding from his lips felt like a violation. "You cannot let this happen." He stammered the words, spilling out in a rapid, desperate flow. "I saw your professional networking profile last month. You secured the senior partnership at your accounting firm. You possess the capital. You hold offshore investment accounts. You can transfer the funds to satisfy the bank. You can halt the foreclosure and clear the hospital ledger. We can fix this together. You can save the house." I stood motionless, absorbing the sheer, staggering magnitude of his audacity. He had emptied my life savings, abandoning me with a cruel, handwritten note. He had forged my name, attempting to drown me in fraudulent medical debt. Yet, standing amidst the burning wreckage of his own malicious choices, his default instinct was to demand I write a 7-figure check to rescue him. He expected me to liquidate my hard-earned assets to provide a soft landing for a woman who had called me a genetic downgrade. He truly believed my existence served only to facilitate his comfort. He viewed my career, my intellect, and my resources as his personal emergency fund. I maintained a steady, unblinking stare. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic pleading. I did not berate him for his breathtaking entitlement. I merely reached my left hand into the deep side pocket of my leather tote bag. My fingers closed around the thick, heavy paper of the sealed manila envelope waiting inside. How do you destroy a man who feels entitled to your salvation? I withdrew my left hand from the leather tote bag. My fingers held a crisp, pristine envelope constructed of heavy stock manila paper. The upper left corner featured a stark governmental seal printed in deep navy ink. The item was entirely foreign to the sterile environment of a maternity ward waiting room. I extended my arm, presenting the sealed package directly to the hyperventilating man begging for my financial salvation. "I am not here to save you, Derek." I stated the sentence with a quiet, absolute finality. My vocal register did not fluctuate. I remained composed, anchored by the cold, hard facts I had spent 13 grueling months assembling. "I am here to give you a tracking number." Derek stared at the rectangular object suspended between us. His chest continued to heave, drawing in ragged, desperate breaths. He slowly raised his arms, his hands trembling violently. He hesitated, as if touching the paper would trigger a physical detonation. He finally pinched the edge of the envelope and pulled it toward his chest. His eyes darted across the official printed seal, attempting to decode the sudden introduction of a federal document into his personal catastrophe. "What is this?" He whispered, the words escaping his lips like a dry rasp. I lowered my arm and folded my hands neatly over the front of my trench coat. "It is a comprehensive whistleblower report," I answered, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the polished floorboards. "I filed the initial dossier with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service exactly 8 months ago." Beatrice, who was still weeping into her hands in the adjacent chair, stopped crying. The mention of federal regulatory agencies acting like a sudden bucket of ice water thrown over her grief. "While you were sitting in that downtown mediation office, laughing at my meager alimony requests, I initiated a deep web tracking protocol. I explained mapping out the timeline of my invisible retaliation. You assumed I was focused on mourning a broken marriage. I was focused on locating the $140,000 you wired out of our joint savings account. I hacked the routing architecture of Apex Holdings and identified the exact coordinates of your offshore shell company. Derek swallowed hard, his throat working to force moisture past his vocal cords. The realization that his supposedly brilliant technological firewall was breached by the woman he discarded caused his shoulders to sag. However, tracking my stolen capital was merely the introductory phase of the audit. I continued projecting a steady, authoritative cadence. When I gained access to the primary ledger of Thorn Ventures, I discovered you were not just embezzling from your own client escrow accounts. Your boutique brokerage was generating a steady stream of secondary income. You were operating a shadow conduit, routing untraceable cash through your commercial properties. You were actively laundering illicit corporate funds. The security driver standing a few feet away shifted his weight. The atmosphere in the lobby escalated from a tense domestic dispute into a high-stakes criminal revelation. You were accepting massive wire transfers from rival venture capital firms and scrubbing the transaction data through your real estate portfolio. I delivered the final devastating blow. You were laundering capital for the direct market competitors of Julian Croft. The name echoed through the expansive medical lobby. The heavy, frosted double doors leading to the neonatal intensive care unit swung open abruptly. Julian Croft strode back into the primary waiting area. He had successfully secured his son, terminating the hospital administrative barriers with the sheer force of his unlimited legal resources. He was walking toward the main exit, intending to leave the ruined Thorn family behind him forever. He possessed zero interest in the domestic squabbles of the lower classes. He stopped moving. The polished leather soles of his shoes halted sharply against the linoleum. His head snapped toward Derek, his pale blue eyes narrowing into dangerous analytical slits. The billionaire processed the information instantly. The puzzle pieces connected in his mind, forming a vivid picture of extreme corporate betrayal. The weak, foolish decoy he had allowed his mistress to utilize was not just a naive placeholder. The man had been actively facilitating financial warfare against his own venture capital empire. You laundered capital for my market rivals. Julian spoke the words in a dangerous, low register. The ambient noise of the hospital seemed to vanish entirely, replaced by the terrifying, localized pressure of a billionaire realizing a subordinate insect had attempted to bite him. The man who owned the private investigator, the man who dictated municipal policy through anonymous donations, was now staring directly at the architect of a shadow operation designed to undermine his fortune. Derek flinched, stepping backward away from the advancing titan. He raised his hands, clutching the federal envelope against his chest, as if the paper could shield him from the impending wrath. "No," Derek stammered, shaking his head frantically. "That is a lie. She is lying. She is just an angry ex-wife trying to ruin me. I do not even know your competitors." Julian did not argue. He did not engage in a petty screaming match. He merely reached inside his tailored overcoat and retrieved a sleek, black mobile device. He dialed a single programmed contact, routing his call directly to his senior corporate legal team. He raised the phone to his ear, his eyes locked onto my former husband, projecting a promise of absolute financial annihilation. I turned my attention back to the hyperventilating man trapped in the center of the room. I had successfully weaponized Derek's own insatiable greed against him. He thought he could steal from his wife, deceive a billionaire, and manipulate the commercial real estate market simultaneously without ever facing an audit. He underestimated the meticulous patience of a forensic accountant. The forged electronic signature on the hospital admission forms constitutes a severe state felony. I clarified, laying out the precise legal parameters of his doom. The local district attorney will undoubtedly pursue maximum sentencing guidelines for attempting to defraud a major medical institution. However, the money laundering operation executed through your commercial real estate firm is a federal crime. That falls under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I paused, allowing a single, slow heartbeat to pass, before delivering the final update. The tracking number printed on the flap of the envelope indicates the preliminary investigation concluded yesterday. Federal agents obtained the necessary judicial warrants this morning. They are currently executing a coordinated raid on your downtown commercial office. They are confiscating your servers, securing your physical filing cabinets, and freezing all associated liquid assets. Your brokerage is not just bankrupt, Derek. It is an active crime scene. The remaining structural support, holding my former husband upright, completely evaporated. His knees buckled. He fell downward, his tailored trousers striking the hard waxed floor with a heavy thud. He collapsed onto the linoleum, a broken, hollow shell of a man. The crisp manila envelope slipped from his trembling fingers, sliding across the ground and coming to rest near the toe of my sensible leather boot. The elaborate trap I spent 13 months constructing had finally snapped shut. I secured the perimeter. I fortified the digital locks. The arrogant golden boy who discarded me via a sticky note was now kneeling on a hospital floor, facing state felony charges, federal prosecution, absolute poverty, and the boundless vengeance of a humiliated billionaire. I stood over him, viewing the wreckage of his life without a single trace of sympathy. He constructed his own gallows. I merely provided the finalized ledger. The situation was stabilized. The variables were neutralized. However, my quiet, tactical victory required one final, official verification before I could exit the building. I was the architect of his exposure, but I was not the individual tasked with executing his physical capture. The heavy sliding doors at the front of the lobby parted once again, signaling the arrival of the final essential element. The sliding glass entrance doors hissed open, admitting a sudden rush of chaotic energy into the stagnant air of the lobby. The rhythmic squeak of heavy-duty rubber soles signaled the arrival of local law enforcement. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the medical facility. Their utility belts jingled softly, producing a sharp, metallic sound that instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Walking purposefully between the 2 officers was a tall, stern-looking woman wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit and a laminated identification badge clipped to her lapel. She scanned the waiting area, her gaze sweeping past the weeping matriarch, the kneeling real estate broker, and the imposing billionaire currently muttering rapid-fire instructions into his cellular device. Her eyes locked onto my trench coat. "Ms. Watson!" she called out, her voice projecting crisp administrative authority. I turned slightly toward the approaching group. "Yes, I am Ruby Watson." Beatrice Thorne suddenly launched herself out of the plastic waiting chair. The arrival of uniformed police officers triggered a desperate final surge of elite entitlement within her, breaking her catatonic shock. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. Her fake cubic zirconia pearls swayed wildly against her collarbone. "Arrest her!" Beatrice shrieked, her vocal pitch cracking under the strain of absolute hysteria. "She is the financial guarantor. She is legally bound to satisfy the account ledger. She is actively refusing to pay the medical bills for my grandson. Arrest her right now for attempting to abandon her contractual obligations." The director of finance did not break her stride. She ignored the shrieking matriarch entirely, treating Beatrice like an irritating gust of wind. The hospital administrator halted 3 feet away from my position and offered a brief, curt nod acknowledging my presence. She held a thick plastic clipboard containing several sheets of freshly printed data. She shifted her attention downward, addressing the man currently kneeling on the polished linoleum floor. "Mr. Thorne," the director stated, looking at Derek over the rim of her reading glasses. "We received the emergency fraud alert affidavit filed by Ms. Watson's senior litigation attorney 20 minutes ago." Derek kept his head bowed, staring at the discarded manila envelope resting near my boot. He did not respond. He merely drew a shaky, ragged breath, accepting the inevitable acceleration of his demise. The Hospital Risk Management Division initiated an immediate emergency trace upon receiving the legal notice. The director continued articulating the details with devastating clarity. "We extracted the electronic intake records from the neonatal admissions portal. We possess the confirmed Internet protocol logs demonstrating the exact digital pathway utilized to submit the financial liability contract. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the top sheet of paper clipped to her board. The digital signature binding Ms. Watson to $500,000 of estimated medical debt was not generated from a device registered to her name. It was generated from your personal cellular phone utilizing a local cellular network tower. The timestamps correlate precisely with the moment you entered the primary emergency intake bay this morning. The two police officers stepped forward, flanking the kneeling man. They did not shout or draw their weapons. They operated with the calm, practiced efficiency of professionals executing a routine apprehension. Derek Thorne. The older officer spoke, resting a heavy hand on Derek's slumped shoulder. You are being detained on suspicion of felony identity theft and attempting to defraud a medical institution. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. The mechanical hum of a motorized wheelchair interrupted the arrest procedure. The heavy frosted doors leading to the secure recovery ward slid open wide. A hospital orderly pushed a standard medical transport chair into the main lobby. Sitting in the seat, draped in a pale blue hospital gown, was Alyssa Harding. Her face was pale, devoid of her usual expensive cosmetic foundation. Her dark hair hung in limp, exhausted strands. She had been cleared for basic mobility following the successful transfer of her premature infant into the intensive care incubators. She expected to find Derek waiting for her, ready to provide a comforting embrace and a fabricated narrative of endless prosperity. Instead, she rolled into the epicenter of a catastrophic collapse. She saw her arrogant, fake boyfriend kneeling on the floor, surrounded by police officers. She saw the furious, betrayed billionaire standing near the exit, coordinating the extraction of his son. She saw me, standing tall and silent, holding my leather portfolio. Alyssa processed the scene instantly. Her survival instincts, honed by years of manipulating wealthy men, kicked into overdrive. She recognized that the Thorne facade was completely obliterated. Derek was no longer a useful shield. He was a sinking ship attempting to drag her down into a federal prison cell. She abandoned the loyal girlfriend routine in a fraction of a second. "He made me do it." Alyssa shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. She pointed a frantic, shaking finger at the man kneeling in front of the officers. "I had no idea he was forging those hospital documents. I was incapacitated. He stole her identity while I was experiencing severe labor complications. I am a victim here." Derek jerked his head upward, his face twisting into a mask of pure, feral rage. The woman he bankrupted his own company to impress was actively throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. "You lying parasite," Derek roared, fighting against the firm grip of the arresting officer. "You begged me to find the money. You demanded the private room. You spent my entire corporate escrow account on designer jewelry while sleeping with that old man behind my back." Alyssa ignored his furious accusations. She turned her tear-streaked face toward the imposing figure standing near the entrance. She clasped her hands together, performing a theatrical display of desperate vulnerability. "Julian, please," she sobbed, attempting to utilize the manipulative tactics that previously secured her luxury apartments and expensive art purchases. "Tell them I am innocent. Protect me, Julian. Our son needs me." Julian Croft terminated his phone call, sliding the device smoothly into the inner pocket of his cashmere overcoat. He turned his head and looked at the weeping woman sitting in the wheelchair. He did not display anger. He displayed absolute, frigid apathy. He looked at her the way a homeowner observes a termite infestation, an annoying problem requiring immediate extermination. "My legal team will contact your representation regarding the strict custody arrangements for my child." Julian stated, his voice dropping the temperature in the room by several degrees. "You will receive a standardized non-disclosure agreement and a modest monthly stipend. If you attempt to contact my spouse or approach my residence, you will find yourself entangled in litigation until the end of your natural life. Do not ever speak to me again." He turned his back on his former mistress. He nodded briefly to his massive private driver, signaling the conclusion of their business. The billionaire walked out through the sliding glass doors, stepping into the freezing Boston rain, leaving the ruined Thorne family to drown in their own toxic waste. Alyssa let out a wail of genuine despair, realizing her lucrative meal ticket had just permanently revoked her access. Derek laughed a bitter, jagged sound, realizing the woman who ruined him was also entirely destitute. They began screaming at each other, hurling vicious insults back and forth across the lobby. The polished, sophisticated lovers were reduced to feral animals fighting over the scraps of a destroyed illusion. I stood silently near the reception desk, watching the chaos unfold. The grand empire they constructed, utilizing lies, stolen funds, and performative cruelty, was completely dismantled in under 30 minutes. They assumed I was weak because I chose not to engage in petty screaming matches during our divorce. They thought my analytical mind was a boring liability. They failed to understand that spreadsheets do not experience emotion. Data does not forget a transaction. The math had finally caught up to them, balancing the ledger with brutal, undeniable precision. The younger police officer produced a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic ratcheting sound clicked sharply as the restraints snapped tight around Derek's wrists. He was pulled to his feet, his head bowed in absolute defeat. The authorities began reciting his Miranda rights, the standardized legal phrasing cutting through the frantic sobbing of the two women remaining in the room. The immediate threats were neutralized. The architect of the financial heist was secured in handcuffs heading toward a booking cell. The manipulative mistress was abandoned by her wealthy benefactor, facing a bleak future. I had successfully closed the audit. Yet one final variable remained unaccounted for. I shifted my gaze away from the arresting officers and focused on the plastic waiting chair located just a few feet away. Derek committed the crimes, but he did not invent his own arrogant entitlement. He learned it. What about the woman who taught Derek how to be cruel? The two uniformed officers maneuvered Derek toward the primary exit. His tailored Italian leather shoes dragged across the polished linoleum, lacking their usual confident rhythmic strike. The heavy steel chains binding his wrists chimed a quiet, steady death knell for his corporate ambitions. He did not struggle against the escort. The adrenaline had burned out of his system, leaving behind a hollow shell of ruined pride and profound panic. As they reached the pneumatic vestibule, he cast one final glance over his shoulder. His eyes sought mine, perhaps searching for a lingering flicker of pity, a sudden reversal of fortune, or a last-minute promise of legal assistance. I offered him a blank, unwavering stare. The glass doors parted, welcoming a harsh gust of freezing Boston rain. The rotating red and blue strobes from the parked cruisers painted his pale face in alternating flashes of vibrant color. He stepped out into the storm, his head bowed against the wind. The sliding panels hissed shut, sealing the former golden boy out in the cold, wet night. I turned my attention back to the interior of the medical waiting area. The epicenter of the catastrophe had quieted, leaving only collateral damage scattered across the seating arrangements. Alyssa remained slumped in her transport wheelchair, weeping softly into her hands. She was abandoned by her billionaire savior, betrayed by her fraudulent boyfriend, and facing a bleak future governed by strict non-disclosure agreements. I felt no urge to address her. She had chosen her path. My focus settled on the woman occupying the plastic seat a few feet away. Beatrice Thorne looked ancient. The span of 40 minutes had aged her 2 decades. The immaculate cosmetic foundation she applied that morning was heavily smeared, tracking dark, jagged mascara pathways down her sagging cheeks. Her rigid, aristocratic posture was permanently broken. She slumped forward, her shoulders curved inward, making her appear remarkably small and frail. The cubic zirconia necklace rested crookedly against her collarbone, a cheap plastic reminder of a fabricated dynasty. The smug elite matriarch who had confronted me with a predatory grin earlier was gone. In her place sat a terrified, destitute widow who had just realized she no longer possessed a fortress. She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, swimming in a sea of raw, unfiltered panic. She stared at me, struggling to reconcile the boring, middle-class accountant she had tormented for 5 years with the architect of her present destruction. She opened her mouth, and the voice that emerged was a fragile, hoarse croak. It carried no theatrical resonance. It held only the desperate grasping of a drowning swimmer. "Ruby." She rasped, her trembling hands gripping the rigid plastic edges of her chair. "You could have stopped this." It was a profound display of psychological deflection. Even sitting in the smoldering ashes of her son's federal crimes, her immediate reflex was to locate a scapegoat. She could not fathom that the Thorne men were flawed, so the blame had to fall upon the outsider. "You knew the commercial bank was calling the loan." She continued, her breathing erratic and shallow. "You held the financial data. You could have warned us before he lost the house. You could have told me what he was doing." I looked down at her. I searched my own chest for a spark of vindictive joy, a rush of triumphant adrenaline, or even a lingering trace of sorrow. I found nothing but profound, icy closure. The emotional ledger was balanced. The account held no remaining debts. "I did warn you, Beatrice," I replied, keeping my vocal cadence smooth, unhurried, and devoid of venom. "I warned both of you for years." She blinked, a fresh tear carving a clean line through her ruined makeup. She shook her head in weak denial. During our second year of marriage, I offered to review Derek's commercial business models. I reminded her, recalling a specific evening in her opulent chandelier-lit dining room. I told him his leverage ratios were dangerous. I explained that his operating expenses were vastly outpacing his legitimate revenue streams. "Do you remember your response to my analysis?" Beatrice looked away, unable to meet my direct gaze. Her silence filled the space between us. "You laughed." I said, stating the historical fact without any underlying malice. "You told me that real estate moguls operate on instinct, not spreadsheets. You called my cautious fiscal advice a tragic symptom of my pedestrian upbringing. You instructed me to stop treating your son like a suspicious client and start treating him like a visionary." I took a single, deliberate step closer, ensuring she heard every syllable of my final assessment over the ambient hum of the medical center. "I also told you that cruelty was not a sustainable family value." I said softly the words, landing like precise mathematical strokes. "I told you that treating people like disposable assets would eventually yield a negative return. You chose to ignore the math. You chose to call me a liability." Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut. A ragged sob tore from her throat, echoing pitifully in the large room. She had weaponized her wealth and status for decades, utilizing her elite standing to bludgeon anyone she deemed inferior. Now the wealth was gone. The historic Concord estate belonged to a corporate bank. The country club memberships would inevitably lapse. Without her money, she possessed nothing but her cruelty. And cruelty pays no dividends. I reached down and gripped the loose ends of my beige trench coat belt. I pulled the fabric taut, securing a firm knot at my waist. It was a simple, practical gesture, signaling the permanent termination of my business in that building. I looked at the broken, weeping woman one last time, measuring the distance between the person I used to be and the person I had become. "Leaving me was not the best decision your son ever made," I stated, echoing her earlier morning insult with fatal precision. It was just the last mistake he could afford. I did not linger to witness the fresh wave of hysterical sobs racking her fragile frame. I did not wait for a hollow apology she was incapable of genuinely providing. I turned my back on the weeping matriarch. I ignored the distant, muffled shouts of my ex-husband being loaded into a municipal transport vehicle. I tuned out the rhythmic flashing lights illuminating the rain-slicked pavement just beyond the glass walls. I walked past the deserted reception desk, my leather portfolio secured tightly under my right arm. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 13 months lifted from my shoulders, dissipating into the cool, conditioned air. The perpetrators had cornered themselves. The equations were solved. The audit was officially complete. A lingering, quiet thought echoed in the peaceful space of my mind as I approached the exit doors. Where does a forensic accountant go when the books are finally closed? The automatic sliding glass doors of Massachusetts General Hospital parted one final time. I stepped over the metallic threshold, crossing from the sterile, artificial environment of the medical center into the raw, unfiltered reality of the city. The heavy, freezing downpour that had battered the pavement earlier that morning had finally broken. The storm had exhausted its energy, tapering off into a fine, crisp drizzle. The afternoon air carried the distinct, sharp scent of wet asphalt and rain-washed concrete. It was a clean, industrial smell that immediately scrubbed the nauseating odor of clinical antiseptic from my lungs. I took a deep, slow breath, pulling the chilled oxygen deep into my chest. For the first time in 13 grueling months, my ribs did not feel tight. The phantom weight of a stolen $140,000 no longer pressed down upon my sternum. Society harbors very specific expectations regarding a scorned woman. Pop culture and television melodramas dictate that a betrayed wife must create a scene. She must throw priceless porcelain vases against walls, puncture expensive car tires with kitchen knives, and engage in tearful public screaming matches with the other woman. The world expects a loud, messy spectacle driven by uncontrollable heartbreak. My former husband and his mother relied on that exact expectation. They assumed I would either erupt into a brief, manageable bout of hysteria or shrink away into silent, permanent defeat. They never considered a third option. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not strike anyone or raise my voice above a calm conversational register. I simply gathered the raw, unvarnished facts. I built an impenetrable fortress of verified corporate ledgers and offshore routing numbers. I locked my own doors and allowed the toxic elements of my past to pick the locks to their own federal prisons. Vengeance is a sloppy, chaotic emotion that often burns the person holding the match. Justice, on the other hand, is a cold, mathematical equation. It requires zero passion. It only requires infinite patience and an unwavering commitment to the truth. The universe, much like a corporate balance sheet, always seeks equilibrium. The ledger must eventually balance. As I stood on the damp sidewalk observing the steady flow of pedestrian traffic, a gentle vibration pulsed against my hip. I reached into the deep, tailored pocket of my beige trench coat and retrieved my cellular phone. The bright screen illuminated, displaying a newly received text message. The sender was the neighborhood dog walker I employed. I tapped the notification, opening a high-resolution photograph. The image showed my rescue golden retriever, a gentle animal named Barnaby. He was curled into a comfortable circle, sleeping soundly in a bright rectangular patch of afternoon sunlight filtering through a bay window. He rested on the thick woven wool rug of my living room. Behind him, the digital frame captured the clean, uncluttered lines of my Cambridge condominium. That specific living space did not feature imported Italian marble flooring or towering crystal chandeliers. It lacked a sprawling manicured botanical garden or a wrought iron security gate designed to keep the ordinary world away. However, it possessed a quality the grand historic Concord estate would never reclaim. It belonged entirely to me. I held the property deed free and clear. No secret secondary mortgages shadowed the premises. No forged signatures stained the title documentation. True wealth is not defined by the brand of artificial jewelry resting against your collarbone or the designer luxury logos stitched into your maternity clothing. True wealth is the quiet, profound ability to fall asleep at night knowing the roof over your head is secured by honest labor. I smiled looking at the photograph of the sleeping dog. My life was small, quiet, and infinitely richer than the fabricated real estate dynasty I had just systematically dismantled. I pocketed my device and raised my right hand, signaling an approaching yellow taxicab navigating the slick city street. The vehicle slowed its worn tires hissing against the wet pavement before coming to a smooth halt near the curb. I opened the rear passenger door and slid onto the vinyl seat. I provided the driver with the address of my Cambridge residence. The engine revved and the cab pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the steady flow of metropolitan traffic. I turned my head looking out the side window. The imposing architecture of the medical complex began to recede. The flashing red and blue strobes of the parked police cruisers blurred into vague, colorful streaks before vanishing entirely behind a row of tall brick buildings. The distant wail of a municipal siren drifted through the damp air, fading rapidly until it was swallowed by the ambient hum of the city. The shattered legacy was officially behind me. The taxi driver navigated the route toward the Charles River. He did not turn on the radio. He did not attempt to initiate trivial small talk. He merely drove, offering a rare pocket of undisturbed isolation. I settled back against the upholstery. The rhythm of the vehicle moving over the road provided a steady, comforting vibration. I unzipped my leather portfolio resting on my lap and extracted my tablet. The screen glowed to life, recognizing my biometric fingerprint scan. The internal file directory remained open, displaying the dense web of folders I had utilized to track the offshore accounts, the corporate bankruptcies, and the medical fraud. I located the primary directory labeled Thorn Master File. My thumb hovered over the digital icon. This single folder represented 5 years of a suffocating marriage and 13 months of a grueling, intensive financial audit. It contained every lie, every stolen dollar, and every cruel insult ever directed toward me by a family that viewed my existence as a liability. I pressed the icon and selected the delete command. A secondary system prompt appeared, requesting final confirmation. I confirmed the action without a single trace of hesitation. The progress bar flashed briefly across the glass, and the folder disappeared from the hard drive forever. The digital workspace was suddenly clear. I opened my primary calculation software and initiated a new blank spreadsheet. The pristine grid of empty white cells filled the display. It was a perfect, untouched canvas. There were no negative balances left to reconcile. There were no hidden Cayman Island routing numbers to trace. There were no fraudulent liabilities dragging down the bottom line. It was just an open expanse of pure potential, waiting to be populated with whatever numbers I chose to input next. I locked the tablet screen and slipped the device back into my portfolio, securing the brass zipper. I rested the side of my head against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the Boston skyline roll past as we crossed the bridge into Cambridge. The turbulent storm of the past year had finally run out of rain. The interior of the cab was perfectly still. It was a beautiful, unbothered, and entirely mine silence. The dust has finally settled over the shattered remains of the Thorn family legacy. When I look back at the chaotic, swirling red and blue lights reflecting off the wet Boston pavement, my mind does not linger on the sight of my former husband wearing steel handcuffs. It does not linger on the desperate, weeping mistress or the cold, indifferent billionaire stepping into the rain. Instead, my thoughts inevitably drift back to the woman sitting broken in the plastic hospital chair, Beatrice Thorn. It is a profound tragedy to witness the destruction of a human life. But the deeper tragedy lies in realizing that the demolition was scheduled decades before the building ever collapsed. Derek did not learn to forge signatures, embezzle corporate funds, and discard loyalty overnight. He was meticulously trained for it. His downfall was not the result of a sudden, unpredictable moral failing. It was the inevitable yield of a toxic harvest planted in his childhood. In American culture, we often romanticize the concept of legacy. We work grueling hours, sacrifice our immediate comfort, and strive to build a foundation of prosperity to hand down to the next generation. We want our children to have an easier path than the one we walked. But there is a lethal danger lurking within that noble pursuit. When parents confuse providing a better lifestyle with teaching a better way to live, they risk constructing a fragile, hollow monument. Beatrice Thorn prioritized the external markers of success: historic estates, designer labels, and elite country club memberships, above the internal architecture of character. She raised a boy on a pedestal, shielding him from the fundamental laws of consequence and accountability. She taught him to view human beings not as equals deserving of fairness and respect, but as commodities to be categorized. People were either assets that elevated his status or liabilities that threatened his pristine image. By instilling this elitist hierarchy, she robbed her son of the most vital tool any child requires to navigate the adult world: emotional awareness. Emotional awareness is the quiet, unglamorous anchor of any healthy traditional family structure. It is the ability to recognize the inherent value in honest labor, the strength in humility, and the critical importance of fairness. When a parent fails to cultivate empathy within their child, they send them into the world uniquely vulnerable. Derek possessed no emotional radar. Because he was never taught to value genuine loyalty, he could not recognize the quiet devotion I offered during our marriage. Because he was raised to chase shiny, expensive illusions, he became the perfect, naive mark for a manipulative grifter like Alyssa. He was a man walking blindfolded through a minefield, convinced his inherited arrogance would somehow deflect the explosions. A parent's truest responsibility is not to hand their child a crown they have not earned. It is to hand them a compass. It is the difficult, often painful task of enforcing boundaries, demanding honesty, and allowing the child to feel the sting of their own mistakes while the stakes are still small. If Beatrice had allowed Derek to fail a mathematics test without bribing the tutor, or if she had forced him to earn his first car rather than handing in the keys to a luxury sedan, he might have developed a functional moral compass. He might have learned that cheating the ledger always results in a deficit. Instead, she protected his ego at all costs. She nurtured a breathtaking entitlement that ultimately drove him to steal my life savings, leverage her historic home, and forge my signature on a $500,000 medical contract. He committed these atrocities not because he was an inherently evil mastermind, but because he was a spoiled, desperate child wearing a tailored suit. He honestly believed the universe existed merely to absorb his failures and cater to his comfort. The quiet, middle-class values my own mother instilled in me, the values Beatrice sneered at during my wedding, were the exact tools that saved my life. I was taught that math does not lie, that hard work is a shield, and that dignity is not something you wear around your neck. It is something you build in the dark when no one is watching. In a traditional family, fairness and honesty are not outdated concepts. They are the structural beams that keep the roof from caving in during a storm. We all face moments where the easy, dishonest path looks remarkably tempting. We all encounter situations where our pride urges us to shift the blame onto an innocent bystander. It is the steady, long-term guidance of a parent that echoes in our minds during those critical crossroads, urging us to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. If you find yourself reflecting on these quiet, methodical victories of truth over toxic entitlement, and if you believe that justice is a dish best served with cold, undeniable facts, I invite you to join our community. Please follow and subscribe to the Olivia Stories Revenge channel. We continue to explore the intricate, deeply human narratives where patience outlasts arrogance, and where the ledger of life is always, eventually, balanced. Looking back at the empty cab ride through Cambridge, listening to the soothing rhythm of the tires on the wet asphalt, I realized that we are all architects of our own descendants. The stories we tell our children about who matters, what is valuable, and how to treat the vulnerable will eventually become the blueprint of their entire existence. We hand them the bricks, but we also hand them the mortar. When you look at the foundation you are laying for your own family, or when you examine the legacy passed down to you by your parents, it is worth asking a difficult question. Are you building a sanctuary designed to withstand the brutal, freezing storms of the real world? Or are you carefully stacking a magnificent, glittering tower of cards, just waiting for a single quiet truth to open the door and let the wind inside? The rain eventually stops. The truth eventually arrives. And when it does, the only thing that remains standing is what was built with honest hands.